Let me get my light on here.
Okay, the webinar is now broadcasting to all attendees, and we have 3 people. Welcome. I'm seeing people join us. I'm not calling out names, but I'm seeing that people are joining us as I have opened up the meeting. Welcome to How to Succeed at Leading Through Uncertainty. We will begin in 4 minutes. We'll give it to 12:01, so those that are joining from other locales or maybe running a minute or 2 late will have an opportunity to join us. For those that are here, welcome to How to Succeed at Leading Through Uncertainty on behalf of Princeton Legal Search Group. If anybody would like to put in the chat box where they're joining from, I will just call out the states or the locales. Sometimes we get people from out of country, just for fun. If you want to add your location, that would be terrific as we're waiting for others to join us. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. If you see me looking out to the left, it's because there's a blue sky out there, and it's nice to look at the blue sky.
It's about as nice as it can be.
Yeah.
The last few days.
Certainly is. Great, welcome, welcome to those that are joining us. You are joining Princeton Legal Search Group's How to Succeed at Leading Through Uncertainty, presented by Sandler Training. We sure hope you're in the right place. And it's a couple minutes before 12, so we're just waiting to allow others to join us before we begin, and we'll begin at 12:01 just to give an extra minute for anybody who may be trying either to get on or maybe running a minute late. I sure hope that you all are enjoying this wonderful weather that we've been having, and thank you for joining us. For those that are joining, David Trapani is with me from Sandler Training Institute. He will be running the program today. We are not officially starting until 12:01, but just letting those that are joining us know that you are at How to Succeed at Leading Through Uncertainty, presented by Sandler Training and Princeton Legal Search Group. David Trapani is joining me today. Welcome to those that are joining us. You have joined How to Succeed at Leading Through Uncertainty, presented by Sandler Training and hosted by Princeton Legal Search Group. I have exactly 12 o'clock. At 12:01, we will begin promptly. I'm just giving anybody 1 extra minute to join us for the program. All right, I have 12:01, so I'm going to go ahead and begin. One more time, welcome to How to Succeed at Leading Through Uncertainty, presented by Sandler Training and hosted by Princeton Legal Search Group. My name is Mary Claire Garber, and I'm a principal with Princeton Legal Search Group. We have been identifying professional development programs for lawyers to help you stay engaged, current, and relevant during this time of change. I'd like to congratulate all of you for taking a outside the box step or chance this afternoon. Step one, you took the online assessment. That takes courage. Step two, you signed up and are attending a virtual feedback on interpreting your assessment. That also is risky. And step three, you're open to learning new and different management strategies or techniques. Bravo to all of you for taking the risk, for stepping outside the box in learning in a different format, A, being open to learning, and B, learning in a different format. This is a uniquely innovative format for lawyers who don't usually embrace change. Good for you. Let me begin with just a couple of reminders about what will happen here today. This session is being recorded, and all participants participants are in listen-only mode. Nobody can see who else is on the webinar. Your identity is anonymous. We will make a recording of the session available after the session. No one on the call will receive or see your individual assessment information. David Trapani will be providing insights and strategies based on where the overall group is. So by way of example, if here is the midpoint, if you are to the left of the midpoint, he'll be pointing out strategies to work toward that midpoint. Or if you're to the right of the midpoint, what you may want to continue to do to improve, to enhance your leadership in a crisis. So nobody, again, will see your specific information. The session will run 40 to 45 minutes with time at the end for Q&A. You all have a Q&A function, and you may have a chat function. You can put questions in either the Q&A or the chat function. At the end, I will read out the questions to the group, but I won't read anybody's name. If you would like to self-identify, that's perfectly fine, but this is just, again, to protect anybody's anonymity who would prefer to stay anonymous on the call. So with that, what I'd like to do is to introduce David Trapani, who will be leading us through the interpretation of the outmatch assessment that you took prior to coming to the webinar today. If for any reason you have not had a chance to complete it or don't have your results readily available, that's okay. It still will be informative and helpful once you are able either to find it or to complete it. He will identify strategies for enhancing leadership and competencies to empower and improve individual and team performance. David has 25 years of sales, marketing, and management experience and prides himself on helping leaders gain management insights to bring their teams to the next level. He works with business leaders in 3 specific areas, including business development, people management, and organizational effectiveness. We're here today to talk about organizational effectiveness and how it relates to leadership capabilities. Previously, David's teams have consisted of exceeding results and company goals. He's been involved with 2 significant mergers and acquisitions and has keen insight into overall business practices and strategies. David is a true believer that challenges can be fixed by attitude, process, and/or technique. With that, let me turn the program over to David Trapani. I will be here throughout the program, working with David to make sure that this is effective and helpful program. Welcome.
Thank you, Mary Claire. Looks like you guys can hear me. So quick introduction. Mary Claire told you a little bit about my background. I'm an owner here at Sandler Training. We're based out of Princeton, our office. We have offices worldwide. We're based, home base is Baltimore, Maryland. We train approximately 30,000 plus people a year. 96% of our clients polled would recommend Sandler. So that's good news. And right now we have delivered over 3,000 virtual training sessions in the last 90 days. And we don't believe that there's a company that comes close to that. And that 30,000 people trained per year is probably going up significantly during this pandemic. If you're not familiar with Sandler Training, we focus heavily in business development, sales training and business development, and we work with professional services companies as well as typical sales firms such as financial advisors and technology firms. So what we have you complete, and actually a little bit of a different take here, having a group of lawyers on the phone, this does take some guts to do. This is a very, in my opinion, a very reflective study on yourself. We did not receive a copy. The copies only went out to you. But during the pandemic, during challenging times, some of our personal challenges in the workspace, and actually even beyond the workspace, they can be exaggerated. They can not only be exaggerated, but they can be pointed out. So by taking this questionnaire, this assessment throughout Match, huge kudos to you guys for going out and doing that. So leading in a crisis, we were, however we want to define it, we were in a crisis. And we all took this questionnaire at different times. And if we've gone through it, it probably was a little bit of a challenge, but it's really the outcomes that we want to take a look at. So what are we going to learn today? We're going to walk through the assessment. I'll say pretty quickly, when we do it in this type of setting, we won't share yours, but I guess that's the good news. The bad news is you get to see some of the pages within my assessment, and it was very eye-opening for me. So we want to make sure we're not going to solve all your problems on this call, but what we will do is make sure you're oriented into how to read the material and what we can learn from it. Especially in crisis times, we've got some different roles that each of us plays. Are we leading? Are we setting the tone for our organization? Are we moving folks through this crisis to a better position, or are we managing them? Are we just managing and being, almost responding to things? We want to make sure that we are putting our leadership hats on. We talk about crisis being a temporary place in time, and that's the case. The case is, if we look back historically, and I don't know the different folks we have on the line today. 2001, we had the September 11th attacks. There was a crisis. It was short term. The 2008 financial challenges that we experienced, and we're right back in there right now with this pandemic. How long will it last? We don't know. But in the big scheme of things, it's temporary. But how we react will adjust the culture of the organization. We have to be aware of that. So the tone that we set, the leadership we set, is really setting the changes that are coming in the next, let's call it 3 months to maybe 3 years out. What we do today will be impactful to the team. I believe that there's going to be significant changes in business. And so what are we doing about that? And I put this last bullet here. So Mary Claire, don't jump off just yet. Willing and able. The folks that are on this call put themselves into an uncomfortable spot to learn, be reflective of what's going on behaviorally with you at this time. So we have to have a willingness and the ability to drive forward. It takes those two characteristics to get there. And when we start to look at some folks, we've got some folks that they might be able, but they're not willing to get there. We might be willing but unable to get there. We have to put ourselves in a position, and actually as we lead our teams to a space to identify who is not only willing, but who is able to lead us through this crisis. So Mary Claire, with that, I'll have you push us forward. And I'll reiterate the point. If you have any questions, any comments or thoughts, please put them in the Q&A piece. And don't feel as if you can't ask a question as we're going through this report. As a matter of fact, I'm okay with anybody willing to interrupt and ask a question. Probably others are thinking it. So this is Dave's report. I guess that's the good news and the bad news. It's mine. So what did we learn during this time? Well, Outmatch is a scientific company. They look at the behaviors, the underlying behaviors of individuals, and they piece together that underlying data to give us some outcomes that I can't share what the accuracy of this report is, because this one was developed specifically for the pandemic, but typically pretty accurate stuff is what we're looking at. So as we review our results, what we want to do is be aware, take everything with a grain of salt, that we might have to do some reflection on some of these results. So page 1 of your report, they're measuring 6 different competencies. Are we communicative? Are we resilient? Are we innovative? Are we strategic? Are we influential? Are we supportive? You can see that on the right side of the screen. That's ultimately what we're measuring. That would be page 2 of your report. But on the front page, the top 3 scores are what is going to come out. So the scale is 1 to 5. And here's what we don't know. We don't know what a good score is on the surface of these different competencies that we're looking at. That is actually data that we're hopeful to get when Outmatch does an assessment on, or a study on all of the people that have completed this. You know, what are the right numbers to be at? We don't know that, but these top 3 competencies are 3 of the 6 that pop out. So for me, and we'll all have different scores here, and we'll all have a different top 3. For me, I scored a 4.3 on the supportive scale. My resiliency was a 3.9, and my innovation was 3.3. So, excuse me, I completed this on April 6th, you'll notice. Our organization on Wednesday, March 11th was the last meeting I had in person with a client. By Friday, March 13th, we were moving everything to virtual. This study came out, and I believe on day 1, I completed it. I wanted to complete it early because I thought it would give me an indicator of what was happening at that time. I thought it would expose some things, and that is exactly what was pointed out to me. So when I look on the right side of the screen here, again, I'm looking at this scale, anywhere from 0 to 5, and there's my crisis competencies that are being measured. So a couple of things immediately pointed out. One is on the supportive side, highly supportive. So what did that look like in my world? We immediately embraced a move to understand what was happening with not only businesses in the world, but our clients. So we immediately reached out to all of our clients. We asked them lots of questions. How was their business? What types of impacts were they expecting financially? And we thought the outcome there was really good. What we learned quickly was some clients were having a financial impact. We had a couple that had no financial impact. Some were really concerned. And what we started to do was look at the programs we offer to support the different financial impacts and the business needs of the organizations. And we quickly adapted to that style. So that supportive score was super resonated out to our audience. And to date, the feedback that we've received from our clients was, and even non-clients, folks that did not do business, we did for the months of April, May, and into June, we did a series of free sessions to help train and coach folks in business development. And the feedback we received was off the charts. So you can see kind of how being supportive at that time, again, that's actually a strength of mine, that was beneficial. If that were weak, or shouldn't use the term weak, if that score were somewhere on the left of that scale, we might not have been so quick to adapt. But there were other challenges that I'll point out in a few moments within the report. Looks like we're getting some questions.
Yes. Do we know the relative importance of each of the 6 categories? In other words, are there some categories that are more important than others in terms of evaluating leadership in a crisis?
So I think it's a great question, David, and I think we're trying to better understand that, and we've asked Outmatch for some studies on this data. But I think when you look at each one, and there's only 6 in the crisis model here on that second page, each one carries significant weight. So when we walk our way through, for example, communicative, one of the most important things we saw early on, or one of the biggest questions that we saw from business owners, business leaders, was how do we communicate to our folks who have moved from inside the office to a virtual workspace? If we weren't transparent, if we weren't over communicating, we were missing the mark. There's no question about that. I look at company culture, and in many businesses, if we go back 3 months ago, 4 months ago, when there was no pandemic, communication was not great. That I think is a cultural gap in organizations. Transparency, high levels of communication. When we move people to a virtual world, that became more important. Resilience. Did we bend? Did we not break? Were we resilient? Were we innovative? I look at my score, I don't know where that fits in the realm of things, but on the innovation front, was I willing to adapt? I think by the folks that are here, these are the types of folks willing to be open-minded. One of the challenges, and I'm going to walk us through each one of these, David, since you pointed that out. On the strategic side, I have a low strategic score. That was I won't even say a super eye-opener, because I've been aware of that. And we can see this in some of the underlying data as we go a little bit further. I often will look at opportunity and make quick decisions. When that occurred, it immediately was a reminder. So sometimes we're aware of these things. It was a reminder that I needed to hit the pause button and stay focused on a few elements of our business that would be the most impactful for me, our business, and the audience and clients that we serve. If you slide to the right there, that's a strength of yours. You probably are very thoughtful on what should we be focused on. But if I push too far to the right, we sometimes get analysis by paralysis or paralysis by analysis. We overthink it. So again, we want to be somewhere in the middle here and evaluate or recognize where some of our gaps are. And then the influential side. I was hoping to be more of an influencer, but important to recognize that while I may not carry the weight of influence, maybe more frequent communications would be a benefit. So I don't think that there's one that stands out more than the other, but we've got to be aware of the 6 and see what's going on behind the scenes. So Mary Claire, if you want to take us to the next page, and folks, and David, if there's more questions, please ask. So as I start to look at this, there are underlying measurements being taken into account by the Outmatch folks. And this is the list of those items. For example, from objective thinking, realistic thinking, work independence, multitasking, sociability, and beyond here, that's what is the underpinning of those 6 crisis elements. So we have to be aware that within each one of these, there are some smaller leading indicators that I can get focused on. Mary Claire, if you can jump to the next page.
Mm-hmm. Whoops. Apologies.
So as you look at your report starts out at a very high level. Crisis, the 6 elements, communicative down to strategic. If you look at those, again, good information, kind of a leading indicator to what's going on. But now we're looking at the underlying leading indicators. We might call these behaviors that are actually being measured. So for example, and now we really start to get into some of the substance of the report. So for communicative, you'll notice that it is broken into, or there are 5 elements that make up my communicative score: assertiveness, interpersonal insight, multitasking, positive view of people, and sociability. So this is really interesting to me. Well, a couple of things that I'll point out. If you notice those shaded blue lines or boxes on the chart, that is where Outmatch is saying we would love for you to land. That's their science that goes into this. So we do have some, okay, where do I fit now on the scale? Data showing up right here. And if you notice on mine, my assertiveness score is popped out to the right. So I push a little bit more to the dominant. And if you're familiar with DISC studies or a Myers-Briggs study, you would see that I carry a lot of D or dominant, or I'm 50% dominant, 50% influential. This is really being exaggerated right now. This pandemic, that popped out. I put my nose to the grindstone. We're going to push people forward. That might be something that, and I got this report, that I needed to back off of and get back into my comfort, a little bit more into my comfort zone, which was not pushing people. If I look at this, I'm going to go just a little bit further down. If you look at where I land, and again, the little human being that's in blue on positive view of people was pushed to the left. Eye-opening moment. Sometimes in crisis, things are exaggerated. They pop out. And I remember looking at that going, there was everybody pushing something. Here's how I can help you. Here's what I can do. And I was getting emails like that. So I was very curious and wondering, are these the right things to be doing right now? We were getting bombarded a lot. And I remember going, boy, I bet you if I took this now, I'd be a lot more to the right. But at that moment, I was just big picture, not sure, a little bit skeptical of people. So that was popping out. So as you look at each one of these underlying competencies, you're going to find an area that pops out to you that might give you a leading indicator of an area that you can focus in on. Now, if you notice, I've clicked down on my assertiveness, and it gives you a definition and it gives you a key insight narrative. And it will do that for each one of these. Each one of these can be drilled into a bit further. But this is important. Let's go back to that leading and that management piece. Which one of these is impacting me as a business leader? Which one potentially is impacting the folks that report to me or that I work with as a leader? Is there something here that possibly pops out and says, this is one thing that I really need to get my arms around? Now, I'm doing a lot of talking. I'll hit the pause button in a moment. For those that do know me, I do tend to talk a lot, especially in these situations. Each of us has different scores here. Within communicative, there are 5 elements. We cannot pick 5 elements to work on. As a matter of fact, you'll go through this report and there'll be a lot of things. What you want to look for is just 1, maybe 2 of these underlying elements that are the greatest impact to your business. That's where you want to hit the pause button and say, what can I do differently here? And the report will give you some tips as you go through, but there is data here that can absolutely impact your own work, the work of others around you, and the folks maybe that report up to you. There will be something within this report that will absolutely help you. Let me hit the pause button. If anybody has any questions, if I'm going too fast, if something's not clear, if you can drop that into the Q&A. If you do have the chat, you can do it there as well. But if anybody has a question, I'll give you a moment to pop something in here. Now, while you guys are potentially writing in a question, hopefully somebody writes something in. I love to take questions. I want to just kind of regroup. First page gives us the crisis outline, the 6 overall competencies that we're looking at. As we dig deeper, it's the underlying behaviors, we'll call them, that start to give us the slices where we can actually focus. Mm. So again, there's a lot of data here, a lot of information.
And David, would it be okay if I shared one of my competencies and observations? Would that be okay to do?
Absolutely. I think that'd be beneficial.
So on mine, resilience was lower than what I would have expected. I have been known for perseverance, resilience, determination. So I was quite surprised about that. You and I actually had a conversation about it. And some of those underlying behaviors that we looked at and made some connections and threads were that I'm an extrovert and I get energized by being around people.
Yep.
And in this crisis, in this pandemic, particularly, not January, but February, well, not March, April, May, right? We were really sheltering in place and there was very little human contact. The Zoom and the video conference platforms are wonderful, but it's not real. It wasn't enough human contact for me. So my resilience is down in this type of crisis because of the sheltering in place and the lack of extrovert contact, which goes to my communication or my communicative behaviors. So sometimes if you look at the correlation between the two or raise the question, it gives you further, like, why would that be happening? That's not, I've never gotten that feedback before. And as we probed and looked further, it had to do with the extroversion and that not being met, which wore, if you will, some of my resiliency down.
Yeah, and Mary Claire, I think you sharing that is helpful. I think also for the folks that are on the line, the process of looking at this. I don't know who's taken different assessments over the years, but in my experience, what typically happens is we do an assessment, we complete it. Sometimes they come back to us and we're responsible for it. Sometimes we go to a group or a company meeting, we review it for an hour, 2 hours, a half day, we throw it in the garbage and we're done with it. But the reality is this data in here, contained in here, does point out some of the elements that we want to be aware of, and you have to hit that pause button, Mary Claire, your process of, hey, I'm going to look at it, I'm going to dig deeper, I'm going to understand why is this occurring, and then can I potentially do something about it? I think that that's where most leaders fail in using some of this data, which is objective data, in helping themselves, helping their team, their organizations get better. It does take work. So you may not identify something quickly. And I think, Mary Claire, again, back to your point, it took a little bit of conversation to dig into it to better understand what's going on here. How can I use this? And whether it was keeping you up at night, it may not have been, or maybe it was. I don't think it was. But it's a good eye opener. Boy, here's what really motivates me. That's one thing that we can tag on to say, okay, I can do something a little bit differently here. I'm going to keep moving. So Mary Claire, if you can bring us to the next page.
Yes.
So before anybody, and I'm going to ask everybody to just type this into the Q&A or into the chat. So what is one thing that you're struggling with right now? So Here's what was interesting for me. And again, I shared some of the dates where we're kind of on lockdown from March 13th. I run a business where we go out to businesses. We spend time with them in their sites. We do a lot of virtual training. We have folks coming into our businesses, into our office here in town. And you know, kind of trying to figure out what we're going to do next. And the cool thing about what we do at Sandler is we are very responsive. I got the report and I didn't put it in here, but my innovation score, if I go back, was the 3.3. And I did a deeper dive into that. Now, innovation is made up of cautious thinking, criticism, multitasking, objective thinking, realistic thinking, and reflective thinking. So in the three areas of cautious thinking, reflective thinking, and realistic thinking, it was a very much a leading indicator that, and it was a super reminder that we sometimes chase shiny objects. We sometimes will make investments into things because they look cool. We'll try 4 or 5 different flavors of something, see what works. It was an eye-opening moment where we actually sat down with the person responsible for our marketing, and we determined at that moment, we need to outline a plan. And I know that, you know, to lawyers in the group, outlining a plan may be natural to your style. As a business development person, on that dominant side, a little bit assertive, chasing shiny objects is kind of in my strength. Setting a plan is not, but it was an eye opener that we had to hit the pause button and develop a strategy for the next 2 to 4 months on exactly what we plan to do. How do we plan to address the pandemic? How do we plan to address our clients? What are the conversations? What are the scripts? How will our prospecting go? Looking for new business opportunities. Instead of chasing shiny objects, we developed a plan. Now that plan has kept me corralled. If you can imagine a bowling alley with gutters and those bumpers that we put up for our kids, it's exactly what we did. And without the report reminding me of that gap, I might have figured it out, but I assure you, it would have never been figured out as quickly as I did when I received the report and said, hold the presses, we need to get organized and get back to very objective, realistic thinking. I need somebody who has that strength to help guide me, and let's focus on our plan. And right now, we have built a plan that has 4 phases to it, with very specific starts and finishes when phase 1 became phase 2, when phase 2 will become phase 3, and exactly how we're tackling all of those elements. So again, that may not fit your need, but that's what the report points out.
And David, with that, we have a question.
Okay.
Are the insights and tips in the report generalized, or are they based on my particular assessment?
It's a great question. I'm glad it was asked. They are generalized. So for any of the scores that you got or that you received in your report, if someone received that same score for that same element, they would get the same tips and insights. It doesn't take into account, you know, the plays off of each other. Sometimes these different behaviors or competencies will play off of each other. It doesn't take into account any of that. And that's why at the end, if anybody wants to do a deep dive, we'll be happy to have that conversation. And actually, Mary Claire, if I can just build off of that question, you know, what does that mean? You know, are the insights and tips generalized? What I share with folks is, don't take it personally, take it objectively. So when you see a tip or an insight, reflect on it. Don't take it verbatim. Think about ways that that insight or that tip can benefit you. Sometimes what happens when it is generalized, people will shrug it off and go, that's not me. I can share with you countless stories where somebody said, that's not me, but let me reflect on it, and something popped up.
Right.
It may have been something that occurred in the past or at a previous position. So sometimes we might shrug off the general or the generic type of tips or insights. I would suggest not to do that. At the same time, counterbalance that with it is generalized. So it could have a little bit of wordplay in there.
Right. Right.
It's a great
Well,
question.
it's like in my situation, if I dismissed, if you will, or threw out that resilience, that's not me. I've always been really ranked really high on resilience. So then that must not be accurate. But you know what? In looking at digging deeper, again, the resilience was driven by my need to be around people and not having that social interaction, which then allowed me to do something about it. If I dismissed it, I wouldn't understand why I was exhausted or more exhausted when I think that it felt like I was doing less and I was tired more frequently. If I just dismissed that, I wouldn't have a strategy about how to fix it, right? So.
Yeah. And Mary Claire, I think, again, we've had clients taking this, it was at no charge, but that communicative one, that's a big one. For example, I belong to some CEO groups that are international, and we saw a lot of times, especially early on during the pandemic, what do I share with my team? I don't want to share bad news. We don't have an answer for when we're coming back. We don't have an answer for who's potentially being furloughed. It was okay to communicate that you didn't know the answer. And if I didn't have a high communication score, chances are I buried some of that information and didn't share it at a time where people need to know information. And, we always say sometimes, we're working on it is a better answer than not letting somebody know where you stand. It's okay to share bad news within reason. But if I had a low communication or communicative score, I might be a person who's more inclined to keep information close to the vest. And if I recognize that early, I can do something about it. So each one of these does carry some weight.
Mm. Mm.
So I don't know if folks are going to, and we don't have to write it in the Q&A. We want to keep this anonymous. But think about the one thing that you are struggling most with, and maybe jot that down on a piece of paper. I wish before I did the report, I wrote that down. I got the report and I said, holy cow, we need to fix this right away.
Yeah.
So if you think about what are a couple of things maybe that you are struggling with, you don't need to share it. That's cool. Keep it to yourself, but jot it down. Because what I'm going to suggest is we will never in 45 or 50 minutes get through this report or solve all these issues. What I want you to walk away with, these are the few things that I think I can get better at, whether it's dialing something up or dialing something down, and then use the report as a place to go find that information. This slide I put in, Mary Claire alerted me, hey, you put a lot of slides in here, but this I think is a really important slide. This is what we call at Sandler our success triangle, and we do a lot of things in triangles, but this is critical. For me to be successful, I need to do the right behaviors or activities day in, day out. I want to follow a certain technique when I do those activities. And think about the best sports stars. They're doing this stuff. The best athletes out there, they're doing behavior. They're following their technique. They're doing their activities. But the one thing right now, and you folks that are on here have already taken that first step, as Mary Claire said, is what's going on between my ears? What's my attitude? What's going on in my industry? How do I feel my industry is responding? How do I feel my organization is responding? How am I responding to this? All of that is often between the ears, and we have to determine what's noise versus what's real. And also have the attitude to say, can my organization get better? The only, look, we'll give you all the great tools. There, you know, you have at your fingertips, I believe, a tool that will give you some of those insights, but it starts between the ears. Am I willing to take that next step? And again, by being here today, you probably put yourself in a little bit of an uncomfortable position. So I appreciate that, and hopefully you do too. So do we have any other questions coming in?
I do not see
Anybody have a question?
questions coming in to the Q&A,
Okay.
and on my screen, I don't have a chat function. So if for any reason anybody does have, you shouldn't have, but if you do have a chat function, switch it over to the Q&A.
All right. Well, Mary Cliff, you want to jump to the next slide?
Sure.
All right. So I want to go back to our original question. And, you know, I asked you to write down what's maybe one thing that you're struggling with. Now, I don't know if anybody read the report. And again, you're welcome to use the Q&A box to drop this in. What is one thing, and maybe it's a little bit of a knee-jerk reaction, but I'd love to see some insights. What is something that you plan to do differently? What's one item? And again, I've shared mine, which is we are not chasing shiny ball. I've heard a lot of things that we can be doing today. There are companies out there that tell us how they can help our virtual training platforms and what we can do. And we are going to stay, we'll stay pretty hyper-focused on the things that make sense. That is one thing that we will absolutely do differently. So again, I'll pose the question. If anybody wants to drop that into the Q&A, that's cool. If you don't drop it in the Q&A, write that down on a piece of paper. I am a big believer that when you write something down, whether it be on a whiteboard or piece of paper that you plan to change, the likelihood of you changing it goes significantly higher.
And we have a question.
Yep.
Just wanted to clarify, the blue shaded areas are like best practices or best practice areas for all leaders or for lawyers, the blue shaded ranges.
Yeah, I love the question because again, it's doing that deeper dive. So it is the blue shaded areas where Outmatch ideally would have you land is best practice for all leaders. Now, we did ask the question, will we get this information related to different categories? Outmatch is hopeful that they get enough data that they can put together some studies. If we do get that, we'll share that with Mary Claire and she can get it out to the folks that are on this session. It's a great question, but it is for all leaders at this time.
David Trapani, how long has this assessment or Outmatch and or Divine been in business?
So I will get the data, I will get the numbers wrong, but Divine has been doing workplace studies and Outmatch now, the former Divine, I believe it's in the neighborhood of about 40 years, and they're looking at the science. It's all about the science of the data. So the question that was just asked, we would love to have that for lawyers. We do have some other reports that are very specific by job title, by the vertical people work in. In this case, Outmatch wanted to get something out quickly as it related to crisis management.
Okay. Here's a question. I should have just queued that up. There's a question here. Our company has discussed some significant pivots in our business that may be available to us, but we have decided that it is not wise to make such a shift in the middle of a pandemic. We want to be innovative, but also cautious.
Well, thanks for the statement, and I'll flip it into a question or maybe into a little bit of a commentary, which is, you know, if we have other folks, so if we look at this from the Dave Trapani point of view, I love to be innovative. So my cautious is really low. So we'd be making changes really quickly. I will throw out there, without the report, we might still be operating there. Let's take an opposite view of that. If I were super cautious and very thoughtful about my decisions, and let's go back to 2019, maybe I was slow to make decisions, and that potentially has negatively impacted my organization because I can't make decisions in a timely manner. This report could point that out, that perhaps, and I'm not saying that that's what's going on here, we need to have that balance. If I am an overcautious organization, I am going to get locked into what I was doing before. So am I losing my ability to be nimble and innovative? This is a balanced attack. Dave Trapani showed that I chased too many shiny objects. I needed to dial that back. Eye-opening moment, real eye-opening moment. For another organization, it might be we need to dial that innovation up. And again, I'm not suggesting that that's what's going on here, but I think it's a great notice or a great statement that we could always add a little bit of commentary to.
Terrific. Shall we move to the next?
Absolutely, yeah, let's do it. So I know Mary Claire will thank us, but
Apologies.
thank you guys for attending. But if anybody wants to do an individual deep dive or a little bit of a start into their report, certainly you can reach out. And if you would like some additional content to support this, certainly you can reach out to me. Our website is there and my email is there. And I'll let Mary Claire take it from here.
Terrific. Thank you all very much for attending this innovative outside the box program. We appreciate your coming and certainly are not appreciative, understand and recognize your courage for taking this type of step in terms of receiving feedback. We couldn't think of a better way or a more efficient or effective way to have everybody be able to take it and then receive feedback. And so this was the plan, this was the strategy that we came up with. I welcome any and all feedback on the programs, and some of the feedback that I've received from some of the programs is that people would love to hear more about their management style, their leadership style, how they come across in the workplace. So please, we welcome additional input from everyone and anyone on topics that may be of interest. And we're delighted to have this opportunity to provide feedback on your leadership style during a crisis. And you all now at least have some input, and you can take some further steps with David, either individually and or with David Trapani, so that you're better prepared, that you're better equipped if indeed the pandemic does come back around and there is yet another. And in addition to the pandemic, we've also had some social unrest, which I don't know if, it's not for me to decide if that's a crisis. It certainly is in certain areas, in certain circumstances, but it's another type of situation where your leadership skills and competencies will and are being tested. So who knows what's coming next after, quote, after the pandemic. I mean, we are in a very, a time of consistent and persistent change. And David, I just want to read out that somebody has written in very helpful programs. So it's always nice to hear that feedback. Great. So thank you for the immediate feedback, and certainly continue to reach out to Princeton Legal. Me in particular, my email address is on any number of places. If you can't find it, just go to the website and you can contact me. You have David Trapani's contact information. A recording of this webinar will be sent out to the attendees so that you have it as follow-up, and hopefully you've also gotten David Trapani's contact information. Thank you very much for coming. We're giving you 10 minutes back on a lunch hour, if you will, or lunchtime. We're giving you 10 minutes back in your day. That's a gift from us to you. So thank you. David?
Thank you for your time, everyone.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Stay well, be well.